Thank you so much, Roger. So our next speaker is Bill Whelan. Bill Whelan is a professor with the Departments of Physics and Biomedical Sciences at the University of Prince Edward Island. He received a Bachelor of Science in Physics from PEI and Masters of Science and PhD degrees from McMaster University. His research expertise is in the area of biomedical optics with particular emphasis on cancer diagnosis, therapy, and treatment assessment. He has co-authored more than 50 scientific publications. He was president of the PEI Home and School Federation, co-chair of the PEI Education Governance Commission, and a national director of the Canadian Cancer Society. Bill is currently the past chair of the Canadian Cancer Society PEI division. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Catherine. Can you hear me all the way with the back? Is it okay? I'm not sure if it's going to the mic or not. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. I'll have to lean down here. I have some comments. Well, it's a real, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here this evening, and I thank Roger and Maureen for the invitation to present, I guess, the position of the Canadian Cancer Society on the issue of cosmetic pesticides. Since 2009, the Society's position on cosmetic pesticides is not specific to a particular type of pesticide. Instead, we've called for a complete ban of cosmetic pesticides across the country, mainly because of the reason that they provide no health benefit and they may cause harm. And I'll talk about a number of studies and also that Roger alluded to about that harm. There is a clear, growing, and convincing, in my opinion, body of evidence showing a connection between pesticides and cancer. While not all types of pesticides have been studied or have shown harm to human health, reducing the use of pesticides for cosmetic purposes can certainly go a long way to protect families and all Canadians from potentially harmful chemicals. The Society's position on pesticides is based on many of the type of studies that Roger referred to in his presentation. This is cumulative research evidence on cancer risk, which includes the top tier or the best types of studies, which Roger referred to, meta-analyses of case control and cohort studies that examine health risks associated with this type of exposure. The Society's review of the current literature focuses really on human population-based studies. These are epidemiological studies of pesticide exposure and cancer. And this type of research provides clues about real-world exposure and the consequences of the human's use of cosmetic pesticides. This is in stark contrast to regulatory bodies, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, which rely more on animal studies and toxicology studies to determine the safety and the safety level of these chemicals, and then try to extrapolate these toxicology studies to human populations. So completely different types of studies from what Roger talked about compared to the studies that are used to regulate pesticides. The Society's review of the epidemiological evidence is regularly updated to account for some of the new research findings. Much of the evidence on the health risk of pesticides comes from occupational studies. For example, the cancer risk in farmers and other pesticide applicators, farming families, golf course workers, and pesticide manufacturers. The research shows that pesticide exposure in general is implicated in several types of cancers, specifically Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, and prostate, kidney, and lung cancers. Although many of these studies show weak associations with cancer, the connection is strongest for pesticide exposure in childhood leukemia, adult brain tumors, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, the use of pesticides is approved in Canada by the Pest Management Regulatory Agency through Health Canada. As I mentioned before, approval is predominantly based on toxicology studies showing that there is an acceptable level of risk to human health and the environment. However, despite the PMRA's rigorous safety assessment, we know that some chemicals were approved for use in Canada in the past and were on the market for years until a major health risk was identified. A good example of that in recent past was Agent Orange. Now, some people mistakenly equate pesticide registration through the regulatory body with safety. We don't at the Canadian Cancer Society. The PMRA refers to registered pesticides as having an acceptable risk, but we think, as a society, of it as an unnecessary risk. The notion of unnecessary risk has been embraced by cosmetic bans in many jurisdictions across Canada, which Roger spoke about. Our position on the use of cosmetic pesticides is, as I said earlier, supported by a growing and convincing body of evidence of the connection between pesticides and cancer. We base our position on the precautionary principle that states when an activity raises harm to human health or to the environment, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established in the scientific community. And that's certainly the case now with cosmetic pesticides. Roger alluded to an analogy with smoking and lung cancer. Again, during the period of the 50s and 60s, that cause and effect relationship was not established, but now, 2 decades later, we know the effects of smoking and lung cancer on the cancer burden in this country. Historically, legislation has taught us that we don't fully comprehend cancer risks of pesticides until many years later, which I just mentioned. Another example, the organochlorine pesticides, carrying a high risk of cancer, but were used for many years before being banned from the market when the health risks became apparent. Another interesting statistic is looking to the United States and to other countries in Europe. Roger mentioned the link between cosmetic pesticides and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. From the Society's perspective, we are interested in looking at other jurisdictions and the fact that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma has been declining recently in Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, and in the US, after complete bans on the chlorophenol pesticides were implemented in the late 1970s. So from the Canadian Cancer Society's perspective, we simply cannot afford to wait any longer to enact a cosmetic pesticide ban. So as a final thought from the Canadian Cancer Society in terms of our message of prevention, and for each of you to minimize your risk of exposure to pesticides and cosmetic pesticides, we offer 4 different directions or recommendations. We do recommend as a society to keep children and pets away from sprayed lawns for at least 24 hours. We recommend that all individuals stay indoors when pesticides are currently being sprayed near or around your home. We also encourage all islanders to wash all fruits and vegetables, because many of these fruits and vegetables can contain residual pesticides from the growing process in the agricultural industry. Great to use a scrub brush to help to get more of those pesticides off. And for those of you who are interested, the Canadian Cancer Society also provides a toolkit for dealing with pesticides in terms of looking at other alternatives to deal with pesticides in your homes and in your communities. And if you're interested in gathering information on that, you can call 566-4007, which is the division board office here in Charlottetown. So with that, I'd just like to reiterate our position. It's been the position of the Canadian Cancer Society since 2009, informed by scientific evidence, that in the best interest of all Canadians, that cosmetic pesticides be banned immediately.